N-O-S-T, Nost, A-G-A-I-N, again,
Nostagain.
Hello, everyone. This is our second episode of our new web series, not so new anymore, memorabilia.mp4. As an ongoing web series, memorabilia.mp4 features artists, scholars, and nostalgia enthusiasts in 1-hour episodes, 20-minute talk, and 40-minute live Q&A. Before we begin, I'd like to declare a land acknowledgement. The Nostagain network recognized the traditional territories upon which each participant and/or attendee works and/or lives as either invited or uninvited guests. The work of the Nostagain network is committed to honoring and enacting respect and ethics in the work we do on all traditional and ancestral lands. Today, I am your moderator, Derek Pasborg. I use the pronouns they/them, and I'm a master's student in sociology. And we are joined today by Professor Jonathan Lessard. He is a game designer, researcher, and associate professor of design and computation arts at Concordia University in Montreal, where he holds the Behavior Interactive Research Chair in Game Design. Jonathan has explored the playful affordances of various technologies and concepts such as natural language processing and the possible worlds theory for the past decade. Jonathan, without further ado, you can take the floor.
All right. Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me. Great prompt to talk about this specific game through the lens of nostalgia. And I thank it to you to have thought about this in this way. Like, it didn't really occur to me until I saw the call of Nostagain, and I thought, yeah, there's definitely something of that, and it enriches the whole perspective. So yes, thanks again. So I'll take a few minutes just to talk about the game, and hopefully it will prompt some questions, and we can discuss it later. So I will share the screen. And okay, so I had prepared a new splash screen for you, but I didn't test it properly, and it crashed on me a few minutes ago. So reverting back to a previous version, and it'll be fine. So, C'est La Vie. That's life, as you understand. This came from the general perspective of it the design challenge was, can we do a life sim? By life sim, imagine The Sims or Bit Life on mobile phone, things like that. Can we do something like that, but through a card game, a deck building card game? And with what my inspiration was, a deck is like all the possible things that can happen to you in the future, right? So with different kinds of events, new things might come in the deck that might come forward, but other things can be removed. And another perspective that I wanted to take is, as I began this 1 year ago, and Gen AI came in full bloom, and I was interested to see what could be done with this that wouldn't be just, hey, let's replace human labor by automation, but is there any kind of new expressive potential to this thing that might be tapped from a game design perspective? And that's more what I'm interested in. So explore this. I don't know that I have answers to this, but you might form opinions. So C'est La Vie, we have the two languages. I'll stick to English, and let's begin a new life. And I'll do a little bit of commenting as I go. So it's a game where you begin, you're not there yet, you're just a project. And the first thing is to pick up maybe a family in which you'd like to come in. Now, just from here, I'd like to point out to the fact that it's a very difficult design space because, of course, a person's life, it can be so varied, it's so rich, the perspectives and diversity of what a single life is just overwhelming. And that occurred to me like straight from the start. And every step in this game is just choosing and sacrificing and or prioritizing, and that's difficult. So to help me figure out where to start from and make design decision and not just to be overwhelmed and buried and drowned in all the possibilities, I thought, well, you know, they tell authors to write about what they know. So I thought, okay, well, let's not simulate any life. Let's simulate my own. And that would be a starting place. And of course, from there on, there would be many variation. So this is why you begin in 1979. Which is the year I was born, and I've tried to set the action in the Quebec province of that time, and that will be maybe one of the key points to talk about nostalgia, because as I chose to set it in my own past, then of course I project all sorts of memories and expectation as to, or understanding as to how that past was, but using the generative AI for support for content means that I'm battling, or I'm leveraging and or fighting with all the learned biases that these systems have as to what might have been Quebec in the 80s, and they don't really know, but they have some ideas as to what the 80s looked like or should have looked like, or what we think the 80s looked like, and these transpires in all the imagery that we'll get. So we have to pick parents, and I didn't want to preclude all. I want to open things up as possible, so we can define the kind of set that we want. We can have like a single dad, and here we have Roger Carpentier is one of our fathers, or our father, and in true to the spirit of anchoring it in time, the names and the last names are picked from lists of the most common names in Quebec at that time for both family names and first names. So, you know, let's have two dads as a couple for this run, Max Laroche and Roger Carpentier. And then depending on what we chose here, we might have different options. So maybe we already have an older brother, an older sister, and our current option to come into this world is to be adopted. So let's try that. This is the fast track. If you go through conception, it takes a few cards to get there. So here we are, Anthony Laroche, that's us, and we're a baby. I'm here, baby. So the way this works is here, these are the cards that we can play. This is us, and whereas all the cards here, they were pre-generated, meaning that, you know, I took the time to create some imagery to illustrate them. The image that represents us right now in this run, this one is generated live, which means that this image here I've never seen before. But I think it's a pretty cool one for a discussion because first, okay, this is a representation of Anthony Laroche, presumably with one of his parents, Roger or Max. And I asked the generator to set this in the 80s. And well, we can see here what the 80s are supposed to look like, very fluo clothing, some kind of leather with studs, which is interesting. The glasses and the hairdos are pretty reminiscent. But, you know, the thing is, if I look at my own family album, well, probably if you look at this, this probably signals the 80s to you, like it does to me as well, because I associate the era with this kind of clothing. But truth is, if I look at my own family albums, no one looks like that, like really, not even nearly. But it does tell us, it does do the 80s for us. It performs the 80s for us. So here, that's something interesting. And I was like, you know, thinking about this, and maybe I should train the AI on some actual photos so that it looks more true to form. But for now, I decided against that because using AI imagery, first, many people hate it, and I don't always like it either, but I like it when it's delightfully strange and uncanny. And when I try to make it look like actual family photos, it's just disturbing. It just looks like people that could have been, and maybe someone else's actual photo, whereas this is comedy and caricature. and speaks of an era in a stylized and caricatural form. And I think it works better. Like, you might have a different opinion. And the other thing I want you to point out here, which I'm pretty happy, is I'm asking for this to be set in Quebec. And typically I get like a Québécois flag behind, sometimes the Château Frontenac, and there are apparently very few visual items to associate an image to Quebec. But here we have an interesting one. This is something like maybe the Jacques Cartier Bridge in some way. So interesting one. All right. So continuing with the game per se. So the game is, what I was interested in is to not go for the epic story and becoming a astronaut or something, but just to focus on every card being a kind of event that is truly meaningful for an individual, either in a positive or negative way, but that wouldn't necessarily make it as epic storytelling because it's commonplace. Learning to crawl for a baby, a huge thing for their parents as well, but like, you won't necessarily read the story of a baby learning to crawl elsewhere. So in terms of game, like, it's also a game, and every age, we have 6 turns before next milestone. We're a kid. We're now actually a baby, and the next milestone is to be a toddler in 6 turns. And to become a toddler, we have 2 goals. We have to learn to talk. We have to learn to walk, and we also have to keep all our basic needs covered. So if I want to learn to walk, crawling will be a good idea, just as babbling, might be a good idea as well. And in our first run, we also need to choose a social setting. So will we be a middle-class family? Will be a low-income family or a rich family? And it has like perks and others. So you see here, we see this is our deck, and we said that by choosing this, some cards jumped in the deck, meaning that your life choices like shape the space of possibility for your future. And also another thing that I want to point out too is, as I was playing this game and making this game, it dawned on me that it was pretty obvious that the bad cards, let's say, like for example, here we have an absent parent. Not such a huge bad card, but in general, you would have no reason to play this, right? Why? Better have a present parent, like if all things being equal. But this is where the cosmic credit economy works. You can only, like, you have a kind of a budget for good things, and you have to accept to play bad cards to be able to play good cards, essentially. And that's the balance of the game. So here, let's stand, probably vertical, and maybe a pacifier would be nice. But now I no longer have any credits, but maybe that's okay. I don't need to play these cards. But here I want to learn to walk, right? But I can't play it because I don't have any credit for it. So this is where maybe I have to accept some like bad thing for me, or let's say less exciting thing, so that I can pay for the things that will lead to achieving my goals. So here, for example, a postnatal depression card. Now, this is one of those cards that I'm happy with because, like, these are very difficult and serious themes, and parentality, like, doesn't get played out much in games in general. And, it's hard to make a game on postnatal depression, but in here, it's something it's a moment. Like, you can play it, it has happened, and like, you're invited to think about it or not. Some people just play the game for the numbers, and some people are like, oh, I don't want one of my parents to experience postnatal depression, and they just won't play it. But if you want to move forward, you got to accept some bad card. We could even maybe skip the turn in the hope to see a bad card that wouldn't be as bad. Like, oh, you see an illness? Like, some of these images, they still crack me up. Once again, I'm looking to me, the taste and the texture and the contribution of AI imagery in here is not when it works, but when it doesn't work in ways that an artist wouldn't have thought of exactly in those ways. Like, for example, here we have the junk food card, and you can see what's this? The bottle, the baby bottle, is an actual Coke bottle with the little, I don't know, suction cup on top of it. That's funny, it's pretty surprising, and when I saw it, it really cracked me up. And so I think there's something in here that we can actually latch upon as to be, okay, there's some kind of uncanny, weird creativity. And the fact that the choice of the theme of this game, where it's all very common, all very mundane, makes these images even stand out in their uncanniness, because we know what a baby should look like and we know what they should be eating. And because it's so weird and uncanny and strange, we pick it up much more than if it was a fantasy setting, for example. So let's eat some junk food. My parents are awesome. Let's be ill to gain some credit. Now maybe I can talk. Oh no, I don't have enough credits yet. Oh geez, this is becoming tight. Chill parents. Oh, a diabolical sitter, that will be perfect. Learn to talk, learn to walk. Okay, I'm all good. I think all my aspirations will be done, which means that I can safely go into toddlerhood, and I'll show you maybe the. Actually, let's buy a new TV. Can we buy that? No, I don't have enough. Like the alcoholic parent, nobody ever wants to play it, and which I understand, obviously. So let's just maybe skip turn. And this is another thing that I want to show, and maybe we can even stop from there. After that, you'll get the main picture. But if you successfully pass an age stage, like bravo, you're a toddler now, you get treated with a live generated poem. So this poem was just for us, and we get a poem based on whatever cards we played. So what did we get? Destiny picked my dads, both hockey fans at heart, with chill parents who claim kids are smart. Okay, left with a sitter who's wild and bold, those gummies were trouble, or so I'm told. Okay, that's not a great poem. Sometimes they're a bit better, but it's kind of the reward that you get. These the AI systems, they allow for very, that's what I'm trying to explore, personalized, very customized feedback. This poem is not good, or the poems that we get here, they're never great in any kind of capacity, but the fact that they speak and address what you've been playing, I find it's kind of rewarding. I always get a kick of reading what the poem will be about. We got a new image. Amongst funky artifacts is the fact that sometimes the prompt items are just shown directly in the image, like, okay, this is the 1980s. Well, because it's written right on the photo, so you should know. And of course, well, the system gets often confused. So here am I, Anthony Laroche, and I know I have two dads, but who's this person? I don't know, maybe it's an aunt or a friend of the family, but they do share some fashion statements. So that's another reward for passing successfully an age stage, is you'll get a new photo. And now you're a toddler and you have new aspirations. Now you need to be able to sleep alone, to eat cleanly, to dress yourself, and to be clean. And also, as you grow older, you acquire personality traits. So will you be nonchalant or eccentric or traditionalist, rebellious, or fearful, which this image also makes me laugh every time. Let's be fearful. And yeah, so now you gotta address your new goals, keep your gauges up, and balance positive and more negative turns cards as you go, and try to make it to the next age, which is just being a child and then teenager and stuff like that. I mean, we're currently working on the teenager age. This is as far as you can get right now. All right, so I'll stop sharing, and I could continue, but I feel like as we move forward, it's a bit more of the same. So we get the gist of it, and I can go back if there's any specific questions. So I'll stop here and welcoming any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was fantastic and really kind of eye-opening. You don't expect kind of the life of cards to kind of like be the thing that you're dealing with, but like such is life. So I mean, I'd like to I'd like to enter our moderator Q&A section. So I have a few questions myself. I'll ask my colleague Rowena Chudkowski, fellow moderator, to join in if she'd like, but I have a few questions of my own. I'd like to start with this idea that we discussed back in our pre-meeting together, and here as well. You discussed how the image generation for C'est La Vie and how they project back the idea of what 1980s Quebec looked like from a Gen AI kind of perspective, and how this represents a tension between new technology and construction of memory.
Yeah.
I'm curious about whether you feel this tension will have any impact on future game development, and whether it has the potential to cheapen things, as you put it.
Yeah, that's the question, right? And like these tools have been around, like let's say at the production level. We've been following them for years, and they were funny and wonky, and now they're not wonky or funny anymore. They're more like challenging and like question bringing. So it is like AI imagery, at least for people who now have an awareness of what it looks like, we can pick it up we've become literate of it very quickly. So like I discussed this with my daughter, she sees it immediately, she knows it. And I think quickly it will be the case. Just like stock photos, you know a stock photo, like, this is the stock photo of a student being happy being a student. And AI imagery is somewhat the same. It's like, okay, it's an AI image. And so, yeah, it's cheap. I think it does signal as cheap. And that's a good news. I think that's good news because it means that then if it's used, and if it's only used as a cheap replacement, then it will also be received as a cheap replacement. And people will say, they didn't bother, or it's okay for an ad for chips because no one cares, but I'm not going to pay $70 for a game that is all filled with slop. So that's my current reading. Studios right now, game studios have been very prudent in using it. They're mostly using it for code and stuff that doesn't show. So it means that on the art side, it's like it doesn't seem like it can cut it for big things, at least not in the games. They haven't used it, but we have to say that the big studios, they're very invested in the traditional pipeline, and so they're maybe not where the changes will come if they do, because they know they do well what they do well, so they'll mostly maybe speed things up in a way. Which leads back to my game, because to me, I want to, like, I put it right up front. It's not, hey, I'm using this on the side, but I don't really want you to know, and because, I can get stuff done quick. It's mostly, hey, let's look at these images for real, and what's in there, and what's weird. There was a moment where these generators, they made all these weird fingers, and, people had 6, 7 fingers. I think it's a shame that they don't do it anymore, because to some extent, I think that was a much more interesting contribution to the history of art than the actual fingers, because we've seen the actual fingers. We can take photos of them, we can draw them, but all of the weird finger thing, that was a new thing. Like, that was some kind of computational creativity that no one really expected, that comes from the algorithms and the way these things understand images. So to me, that's the nail that I think is interesting to hit. What's the weirdness? What's the new thing that comes with this? And that's more what I want to see than just, speeding up pipelines and replacing workers and stuff like that. So, and just to be completely fair, it does do that. These images, if I had to generate, if I had to create the visuals myself or hire students for them, huge amount of work. But what it allowed me to do is, now the work has been displaced elsewhere. And currently I'm actually hiring 5 students to write cards, because that's where the creativity is. And I want people to do that. And because if I ask the AI to write them, they're really boring. And, so yes, there is some, let's say, displacement of workforce, and I'm acute of that because as a professor, my goal is to hire students and get them to learn stuff. And so I see it. If I'm not going to hire someone because a machine will do the work, then I'm particularly aware of it. It's not my goal to save cost. Like because I'm not going to optimize for profit. There won't be any profit. So anyways, I'm aware of all this. I don't have actual answers, but I'm trying to explore it in a curious and productive way rather than like either hide from it or shy away from it or try to not address it. It's uncomfortable at times. I gotta say it, Anyways, I hope. Oh, I didn't speak of the tension with the 80s. So something that, sorry, I'm running on, but I think there's an interesting point about this, is that something that's obvious, as you have seen in there, is that by using one generator in its vanilla form, it kind of flattens out things very brutally. Because also, like you probably saw it, but we have to be very proactive if we want any visual diversity in there, because if I ask an image of a baby, it's always a white baby. It has some preconceptions as to what a good baby looks like. And even everybody looks good in general. If you don't want them to look good, then that you have to force it. And even then there's not much documentation of not good looking people, because I think it's trained on Instagram and stuff like that a lot. And so everybody's like well lit, well composed, and you have to work against that. So I think this is my goal for the future. I'm currently moving on to using open models that I'm hosting myself on my own servers, so as not to, send money away to OpenAI and encourage them in their business models. And that's a lot of work, but also it's super interesting. And ideally, I think the most interesting thing is to fine tune models with some custom data and so to give them really a style and stuff like that. But that's some more work. But yeah, the bias is in there. The flattening of the visual information is like, it's real. It's something that you need to work against.
Oh, thank you for such great insights. And I really think that like you addressing that, like by adding these complex things to these simple things, you kind of turn what can be something cheap into, wait a minute, this is actually like perhaps maybe a reflection of how we reconstitute or reconstruct memories of our own. Yeah. Maybe perhaps not the 6 fingers on the hands, but like just like you said, like it speaking in like pop culture cliches that immediately like catch or like immediately resonate with us. So I guess speaking to that like creativity, you mentioned how in the development of the game, you had started from where you were as Jonathan Lessard. And I was curious as to how you reflected on your own nostalgia regarding what you put in the game.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know, everybody has nostalgia of their own childhood, but I think a nostalgic thing that is common to many people, and as I speak to younger people, I think it's actually pretty prevalent. But there's something about pre-internet and especially pre-phones that is particularly endearing. Something, it's silly because it wasn't lived like that at that time. Like the 80s were considered and 90s as fast-paced, brutal, like times. But the fact that there's no internet and no phones and that connections between people were, I mean, there were phones and all that, but a bit slower. I mean, there's something of, a simpler time. I think nostalgia often points back to something like that. But, just phoning your friend, and that if you want to have an actual conversation, like you go see them and don't chat while you're doing something else. And so, so as you go through all childhood, there's definitely something about that. And, I'm not very nostalgic as a person, but going through childhood typically when I think of childhood, I think of my children. And so that's not nostalgic, that's right now. But now, since it was said previously, and I was thinking of what my life looked like at the time and what could have been concerns of my parents, it forced me to reminisce, you know? And then, so yeah, it does, it works. It does its thing.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I guess, Rowena, did you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to add, this is so exciting and so interesting to hear about, especially as somebody who has also worked a little bit with models aesthetically. I kind of wanted to ask a two-part question. So you have this kind of cheapened aesthetic that sort of emerges when you're using these models, and you're going to train them more in the future and use something customized and open source. So I wanted to ask what you see as the potential kind of aesthetics potentials and the aesthetic future for working within this mode specifically. And I also wanted to follow that up with, where do you see the collaboration of people, which is facilitated by having AI help your production flows go a bit faster and more smoothly? How does that play into the aesthetic potential for this kind of game design as well?
So aesthetic potential, what I find particularly interesting is the fact that you get really something custom right now for someone in their current position. You know, to me that's new. I was always a big fan of procedural generation prior to Gen AI, and I always got a kick of the games that generate a little portrait of you, like I don't know, in Crusader Kings or something where, you know, I don't know, in Crusader Kings, you play someone and then you play their child, and you can see in the child the traits coming from the parents, and there's something very pleasant to like to see a character that encapsulates or is supposed to be really you right now, like it's a new character for you right now. But the expressive spectrum of those models is really deep, and I get surprised every time. You know, I've been making this game for more than a year, so I've seen these portraits come up. I've seen thousands of them, and yet I always get a kick out of them, and I'm always eager and impatient to see my new face, because there will always be some kind of surprise that will crack me up and make me laugh. So, you know, even beyond the quality of the image, just the fact that you can provide one right now with some context. Oh, something that I didn't point out is that in the image, you will see aspects of your life. For example, if you get if you get a car and it's described as a old whatever, it'll show up. And then this image is really like it's tailored to you. And sometimes it shows up in super weird ways. Like, for example, there's a card that plays that says that you have an imaginary friend. And it has all these combinations as to what this imaginary friend looks like. And then this description is sent to the generator. And you get some very, very weird kind of ghost hovering around you that is your imaginary friend. And that's funny. That's funny. So, and same with the text. Like generated text, typically, you know, it's boring. It works. You understand it, but it's rarely exciting. But these little poems like this, we didn't get a very good one, but sometimes it's like, that's kind of clever. It speaks to, like, it's not a poem that you would write in your poem book or send to someone because, you know, it's cheap. But right now that poem is just for you, and that's kind of interesting. So to me, the aesthetic is this on-demand thing, this customization thing that allows for being cheap, because it's not like, oh, I made this image, like enjoy it right now. No, it's, yeah, here's a cheap image that just came up for you right now, like consumption immediate, and that's as good as it gets. That's beyond the uncanniness of some of the imagery that I think is also interesting, which is also, by the way, one reason to have my own models is the problem of models being updated is critical, because then you lose everything you liked about them in the new model and then get to start over. But if you own it, you can kind of crystallize it. And then about collaboration, well, now we've just begun working as a team. It was only 1 or 2 people before. Now it's a larger team. The only thing I can say is that as everybody's kind of getting these images generated for the cards and trying to pinpoint something that would be both funny and not too weird and uncanny, and it's actually hard. It takes a lot of back and forth to get an image that isn't just cringe this looks like an actual person, but that points to something funny. But we laugh a lot. Like we sit all around the table at TAG at Concordia, and someone posts an image they're working on the Discord, and then you hear everybody around the table like ha 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 ha, because it's weird, it's crazy, and so there's something of that. Of course, there are some quality of life or productivity things that help. At this point, I'm already at almost 200 cards, and so whenever I create a new card, I want to know the interactions with previous cards, because I forgot, I can't hold them all in my head. And if I create a new card that says, hey, you have a bike, is there any previous card that could have led to this a bit more and tying them together? But then the AI systems that can be used for that, like here are 150 cards, tell me which of those would have been useful or meaningful in this context. And then like the answers are not great, but they do highlight, like bring your attention to, oh yeah, this is a good idea, this is a good idea. So there are some, like there are definitely some productivity aspects with fixing code for sure. Like that's probably the hugest things in terms of productivity is writing code. Especially with a small game like this, you don't need a super complicated architecture. So fixing things is something efficient. I don't know if your question hinted at those kinds of things. Yeah.
No, for sure. I think it's really important to talk about production like this very frankly, especially there's not always a huge understanding about what AI actually means in the production process.
Mhm.
Derek, I don't know if you have any other questions before I ask something kind of weirdly specific about production.
Yeah, no, actually, it is a question related to like the idea of like designing like the cards themselves. So you mentioned how you have to play both good and bad cards to keep the deck kind of in order or keep a kind of like balance. And like including, like you had mentioned in our interview, you had cards where you could be bullied or be the bully. And so like designing for this like ambivalent nostalgic affect, what do you think is important about highlighting both like the positive and negative aspects of our memories that are often overlooked?
Yeah, it's tough. But it's also very fun. You know, I see Camille is in the room. He's working with me. And oh, you missed it, Camille, but last week, as Derek was mentioning, I think Angel, who's working with us, mentioned that, hey, we have a bullied card. Like it's one of those bad cards. You're in primary school and you get bullied. And so you get a lot of credit for that because you undergo a very difficult time. But she mentioned, like, hey, you know, if you can be bullied, some people are the bullies. So should we have a card where you're the bully? And we were all, that's a good idea. But then you have to. The problem is with modeling. It's a simulational and modeling problem. How does that translate to numbers? Do you get credit from being the bully, or do you spend credit to have the advantage of being the bully? But like, does that mean being a bully is a better thing than being bullied? Like, because being bullied is considered a bad thing, but being a bully, is that the opposite? So does that mean, oh yay, like I'm gonna pay credits to have the privilege of bullying other people? Because every time you put number on a life experience, you're saying a statement about it, and that's a difficult one. And like, you know, so we didn't totally resolve this. And then, so speaking of nostalgia, there's also the problem of these cards, they resonate totally differently for everyone, right? So that's also a sensitivity that we try to have, of course. And given now we're different people around the table now, so I'm always curious to see how other people read the cards, because, you know, it can be funny for you or for me, but for some people it might just be, this is terrible. You know, I can recall this situation and like, that's not a joke. That's not a card that I want to play. So, you know, there is some risk taking in this game. Of course, it's set as satirical and comedic, so that you gets away with it, like it's owned, like this is asserted. But then where's the limit of how funny, how far can you go in thinking this is funny and you're just discarding the experience of people? So I'm always like, when I get people to play, sometimes I see the cards pop up and I'm next to them and like, what will they think, you know? But like, and some people just react. At least there's the option of not playing a card. The card is prompted to you, so that's one of the way I get out of it in my mind is, you know, if you had postpartum as a parent and that was a terrible moment for you, well, as the card shows up, let's play another one, you know, let's not play that one. So I think that's fine, but it's hard for me to speak of everyone's either nostalgia or affective history with those things, but then I don't want to stop myself from this. So yeah, it's a balancing act. Every single card, not every, like some are just funny, but sometimes some of the more interesting ones are exactly because they're not funny, you know, or they're borderline, or they're edgy, or they're conflictual, let's say. But you know, sorry,
Fantastic, thank you.
I'll draw some. There's also a line where I want to draw is something there's just subjectively unfunny, like or not unfunny, or it's just bad. There's no reason that there's no way this would be a good thing, or you can spin it in a way that would be a good thing. I don't know. Hey, sorry, I just had this last time.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. That was more than I could ask for that question. Thank you. Rowena, if you want to ask your very specific question, then we'll move on to the audience Q&A.
Yeah, I wanted to say, well, this is more of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to say, I think something that's really interesting that I see emerging is also kind of that tension between like what is funny and what isn't. And this aesthetic kind of gives a level of just like playfulness and levity to something that, you know, life is tough. So sometimes you laugh or you cry. So one of the things that can make us laugh or cry is with the production pipeline seems to work or not. So I wanted to, earlier in your talk, you mentioned that one of the things you have to do in the kind of production process when you have the images generating is work certain specifications and parameters into it in order to get the desired result. Sometimes you end up fighting. I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Before I answer about the effective, just one thing about the effective of the card. I find it's worse with the AI imagery with the very positive cards. You know, I have an image where you get hugs, like an event is you get hugs from your parent, and the image is very, very endearing. Like it's a dad that is giving a hug to its child. And I find that more challenging to see, because I feel like the machine is tricking me into relating. Whereas when it's funny, I get a distance. But when it's touching, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, like it's playing with me. And so just wanted to mention that. As for the pipeline, getting these images, it's hard now. It was a bit easier because we were using ChatGPT's image generator, which I find is good because of the conversation you can have, you know, a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. But they updated their engine a few months ago, and at some extent, it's like it works better for some reasons. But I find it's much less funny, you know, it's much more realistic, and we have to fight against that all the time because now we're totally in the uncanny valley with the new images, whereas before it was a bit more funky. So it's a lot of back and forth. The main thing is finding some kind of illustration. Like if you want to illustrate, like how do you represent a situation? You know, being bullied, like just because I have this in mind. So I imagine, okay, there's this little kid and there's this other kid that's kind of pointing at their lunchbox because that's the image of someone stealing your lunchbox. But then how do you make this person understand that this is a bullying situation? And then how do you characterize the bully? Should they be look like some kind of like rather bigger or whatever? And then also the main generators, they have these content policies, and whenever there's a child being featured, they will be super, super prudent and will refuse. Now they refuse 80% of our requests. And they're like, oh no, there's a child and there's some kind of situation that might be something, so let's not. And I think they probably do well to do that. But then it's makes our life complicated. So a lot of back and forth of stylistic changes, a little bit stylized, but not cartoon, a little bit realistic, but not photorealistic. And we do a lot of also checking with our teammates, like, is this funny? Does this work? Like, and so yeah, it's a lot of back and forth, and it's actually much more time consuming than one would expect, and it can take hours really to get a good image, especially waiting for the engines to generate. So I haven't found a pipeline that says, oh, here are the 3 steps and you get the image. It's a lot of maybe a bit this, maybe a bit that, and yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really important whenever we're talking about working with this technology, what it actually is like to work with it, because I think there's a lot of times the assumption that it's just going to make everything super easy. But my experience has also always been just fighting and trying to find the right number of inputs and transformations and filters and negative stuff in order to try to get it there.
Oh yeah, it's hard. I have this process just for technicalities where, I use many local models because they're less policed, so that I can do the filtering myself, but they're much less imaginative than DALL-E and ChatGPT. So I use one text model to generate and invent details and get a full prompt to then to send to the model. And so you get all these crazy pipelines that, as an artist, it's so weird. I began my game dev life as a 3D modeler like 20 years ago, where I would push vertices and stuff like that. Totally a new domain now.
Yeah, I would say, and also just as a quick jump in, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please drop them in the chat. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and I'd love to hear your experience of what's different from 3D modeling in terms of the design. Before I started working with AI, I actually was doing printmaking. I find that it's a lot like graphics and printmaking in my experience, especially if you're using different layers with certain masks and stuff like that, or restricting a color palette. It feels a lot like that same process, but it's a very iterative process of design.
Yeah. To me, what it felt more like is, 3D graphics is a whole thing, and it's architectural and it's very computational. And so, but what can be brought from this is all visual practice, is just the eye for composition, lighting, and then you can judge whatever you get. That's often the difference is people who don't have any visual training, whatever comes out they think it's good. But then you're like, no, for these reasons we can move forward. What it looks like to me is working with a artist. As a professor, I could hire students to do art in other projects. So it looks a little bit like that. I get some kind of proposition, and then it's do a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. Except, of course, the person I'm talking to has a weird understanding of things. so you have to be either very specific, and then things flip around completely, and some implicit things are not said and are not understood. So it looks a little bit like that. But also in this case, I just need images, so that's different. If we were going through a 3D world, that would be a very different process. But I gotta say, it's fun. It's a very fun process. It's a lot like a game. As a game designer, it checks all the boxes of, oh, there's some uncertainty. Should I do this? Should I do that? And then you wait for the result. And then there's some tension and some suspense. And then you get the result, and there's a surprise. And you're like, yeah, but no. And very entertaining. Like, you can spend hours and hours for one image, and it's fun. I gotta say, it's fun.
Yeah, I think it is really, really fun, and it's always, you get surprised by something sometimes too, and that can be a really exciting moment.
Yeah. And then I immediately want to share. It's like, hey, look at that. Like, an image I got recently was I wanted a dad to eat ketchup chips, like chips that are ketchup flavored, because that's very local, I think. But the guy was just vomiting chips with a flow of ketchup, and it's disgusting. It's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and totally not what I expected.
But also absolutely amazing. Do you have that image?
Yeah, I'll share it with pleasure. But that's one of the things where a human artist would have never given you this, because it would have made no sense unless for some reason they had some inspiration, they want to make a joke for you, but like total surprise. So that's where I think there is some kind of creativity. It's weird, it's not on point, but and it's also, of course, the human's job to spot it, like because the computer doesn't know it's been creative. It's just it spat out something as it spat out 1,000 things. But the human can say, hey, wait a minute, there's something here. You know, there's a paper that was written who that compared the way that art that these things can be considered as art is just like found poetry. You know, if you find a grocery list on the floor and it's weirdly literary and beautiful, then it becomes poetry because of you choosing it and saying, hey, wait a minute, that grocery list, it's a poem. And then it becomes poetry. Like machines, they don't know art, but we can make something that they did art by singling it out and say, oh, look at this in this context. That's art, you know, or it's art because of the new framing in which you bring it. Anyways, that's more of a theoretical consideration, but there's something of that. Activation process. I don't know what that is.
I think this is a perfect segue to get into our very short Q&A session. Richie, I know that we can maybe continue the conversation after, so I'm going to jump to Ruth. Ruth says, hi, Jonathan, very interesting game. I'm curious about the relationship between this life simulation type of game and nostalgia as it relates to a feeling of catharsis or a longing for a sense of safety and containment with games and game playing. Do you think games like this provide players a way to achieve a sense of agency and control that real life can't always provide?
Well, I suppose every player will read things differently, but I gotta say playing this game doesn't make you feel that you're really in control because like the tagline is you got to play with the cards that life deals you, right? And sometimes the card that you're dealt with are not the things you wanted to do or say. So no, I think it's more on the sense of it gives you some leeway to explore alternative time, like lifetimes, and do like be a different person for some reason. But I don't think it's very comforting. And also because there is a sense of, now we haven't decided how the game ends exactly, but you know how do you win? How do you win at life? It's that's do you win, or is it just at some point it's over and you have regrets, or you feel it was a life well spent or something like that? So it's more about a sandbox of like domestic life or ordinary life as a possibility space.
Oh, fantastic answer. I have a question from Richie. Jonathan, I love how you elevated AI's role into the game by producing poems that speak to the player's choices thus far. Have you thought, or are you thinking about letting players respond to the poems? Or maybe an AI chatbot that assumes one of the characters produced? What might that lead to? Do you think there is potential for more comedy that you like with the AI?
Yeah, I had made previous games that were chatbot games before Gen AI, when it was complicated to do that. And definitely what I found out is that players are very creative when you let them write. You know, that was my main takeaway from it, is inviting players in the conversation. And I got a lot of creativity because I was reading the logs of players interacting with characters and stuff like that. I didn't think of that in this game because I wanted I'm moving out of a very, very, very complicated game that was never fun and super complicated to play. And with this game, I wanted it to be as easy and streamlined as possible, just to bounce back. So I moved away from complicated things like, okay, now you got to type in stuff. But yeah, there is space. You know, now that we can do all this natural language processing in a very easy way, you could ask, I don't know, that this is just me thinking out loud, but without asking a full poem, it could just be, like, what would it be about? Like, what do you remember from this life moment that is salient to you? Because right now the AI has to pick up what it thinks is like the key moments, but they don't necessarily is the same as the player. So the player might be, oh, I loved when like I got the nice hugs or something like that. Like this, I want the poem about that. So yeah, there could be something, but I'll think of it. I think there might be space in there. Like it could be also even a prompt at the beginning. Like what would you like to explore in this lifetime? And then pick up a few things like that and then emphasize, I don't know, this or that, or the responses, or maybe just at the end, like some kind of open prompt. You're dead now. Was this a good life? Or, rank it from 1 to 5. I don't know. But thanks for the prompt.
Yeah, thank you, Richie. And actually, Richie has a few more things. One of them I don't think we'll be able to get to, but got one question left. And is there a way for players to look back at the cards they were dealt, but more importantly, the cards that could have been picked, like the what ifs?
Not the what ifs, but I see the point there. That's cool. And I don't know if we could bake that in. Some kind of maybe flashback. There could be a moment where you have a dream, and then you go back to a moment, and oh, what would have been if? That's cool. But there is a history log that I want that you can just see all the things that you've done. Nobody ever looks at it, so I was thinking of maybe removing. For me, that's interesting because I like these things, like all the things you did. But some more things could be done with that. The problem is that it's very dry right now, so I don't think so. That's why it's not exciting or not. But there could be more things to be done with that.
Maybe some kind of ending slide.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Segueing to that.
Sorry, just because when you're done, you have supposedly your life flies back in front of you, and then you can just have a quick edit of like boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that would be nice.
Exactly. Gosh, Jonathan, this has been a really fantastic discussion. Unfortunately, we're just at the verge of reaching 2 p.m. and we are unfortunately out of time. I'd first like to thank everybody for joining. We invite you to reach out to us at nostagain@gmail.com and to find Jonathan. He's got a website. He's got a Concordia profile. We're going to have mostly everything on our website that I'll share the link to right now. If you want to stay up to date with everything going on, I invite you to use this QR code and go to www.nostagain.ca, find out what we're doing, what we're up to.
Hey, thank you so much for hosting me. It was really great conversation.